Welcome to This Explainer. For centuries, when we talked about global trade, we immediately pictured giant cargo ships loaded up with spices, cars, or electronics just crossing these vast oceans. But today, the most valuable trade in the world is completely invisible. We're shifting away from a world dominated by physical cargo into this incredibly dynamic, unseen exchange of services.
So think about this for a second. What makes up over 2/3 of the global GDP is the fastest growing segment of international trade, but literally cannot be shipped in a box? It's services. They're the invisible threads weaving our modern global economy together. Whether it's the software powering a German automaker's new design or the financial advice a Brazilian startup gets from a firm in New York, services are absolutely running the show right now. Here's our roadmap for This Explainer. First, what are services? Then, the economic engine, the four modes of delivery, global trends in India, and finally, the invisible borders. All right, Section 1. What are services? Let's dive into the IHIP framework.
At its core, a service is an intangible economic activity. It doesn't result in you owning a physical product to take home. Instead, it creates value by delivering a specific benefit or bringing about a desired change. Unlike a tangible good, like a computer or a car, you just can't touch, stockpile, or inventory a service. You can't save an hour of a lawyer's consultation on a shelf for next year, and there's absolutely no way to put an empty airplane seat in a warehouse to sell tomorrow.
These unique traits make up the really handy IHIP acronym. I is for intangibility. You can't see or feel a medical diagnosis before you buy it. H is for heterogeneity, meaning quality varies. A haircut from one stylist might look totally different from another. The second I is for inseparability. The service is produced and consumed at the exact same time. And P is for perishability. If a hotel room isn't booked tonight, that potential revenue just perishes. It's lost forever. When we contrast this with physical goods, the difference is pretty stark. Goods are manufactured, stored, sold, and then consumed much later. Services, largely because of that inseparability trait we just talked about, are generated and used simultaneously. They require real-time interaction between the provider and the consumer. So you can instantly see why trading these invisible services across borders requires entirely different rulebooks than just loading manufactured goods onto a ship.
Moving to Section 2, the economic engine driving modern prosperity.
80%. Just take a second to look at the sheer scale of that number. In advanced nations like the United States and the United Kingdom, services now account for over 80% of their gross domestic product. It's no longer just a secondary background activity. It is literally the primary engine of economic dynamism today. It attracts massive investment and acts as the world's absolute largest employer across both high-skill and low-skill sectors.
And the lines between goods and services are getting incredibly blurry. Take the modern smartphone in your pocket. It's not just a piece of plastic and glass. It's actually a highly sophisticated bundle of embedded services. The real value is in the R&D that designed the microchip, the software running the operating system, and the marketing campaigns that built the brand. Robust services actually enhance the global competitiveness of the physical goods we buy.
Okay, Section 3, the four modes of delivery and the GATS framework. So, how do we actually regulate something we can't even see? Well, back in 1995, the World Trade Organization established the General Agreement on Trade in Services, or GATS. This was a massive historical milestone. It was the very first comprehensive set of multilateral rules for the modern services sector, and it regulates global service exchange by categorizing trade into four distinct modes of supply. Here's how those four modes break down. Mode 1 is cross-border supply, Mode 2 is consumption abroad, Mode 3 is commercial presence, and Mode 4 is movement of natural persons. Understanding this system is absolutely crucial if we want to grasp how nations negotiate trade today. Let's break them down. Mode 1 is cross-border supply. This is where the service itself crosses a national border, but neither the consumer nor the supplier physically moves. Honestly, this is the absolute backbone of our modern digital economy. Think of services delivered remotely over the internet, like financial technology, cloud computing, or telecommunications. Now, Mode 2, consumption abroad, flips that dynamic completely. Here, the consumer physically moves into the territory of another country to consume the service. The most vivid example of this? Tourism, or international education. When a German tourist travels to Egypt to visit the pyramids, they are physically moving to consume local Egyptian hospitality and tourism services. Moving on to Mode 3, commercial presence. This is when a service supplier establishes a physical presence or a legal entity in a totally foreign market. We're basically talking about foreign direct investment here. Imagine a foreign retail chain opening physical stores in your city, or an international bank setting up local branches. The service provider has actually moved their capital and presence directly to the consumer. And finally, we have Mode 4, movement of natural persons. This covers individuals traveling to another country to supply a service. Now, it's important to note that this is about temporary travel. We aren't talking about permanent migration here. A perfect example would be an Indian management consultant traveling to Germany for a 3-month software implementation project. They go, they supply the service, and then they return home.
Section 4, Global Trends and India, looking at the quantitative market realities. Check out this 2024 WTO data on the leading exporters of commercial services. You can see the sheer dominance of the United States right at the top, with over $1 trillion in exports, followed by the UK. But what's truly fascinating is seeing the impressive integration of emerging economies cracking the top 10. We've got China sitting at number 5, and right there at number 7 is India, pulling in an impressive $344 billion in commercial service exports. So how did India carve out this massive global niche? Well, they've strategically leveraged highly skilled human capital alongside a truly robust IT sector. Combine that with competitive cost advantages, and you get absolute dominance in IT-enabled services, software exports, and outsourcing. But to keep this momentum, India still has to tackle domestic infrastructure bottlenecks and adapt to constantly evolving complex global data regulations. They're a vital player, for sure, but they face very real challenges as the global landscape shifts.
Which brings us to Section 5, the invisible borders and challenges to liberalization. When we trade physical goods, we deal with visible border measures like simple tariffs. You can literally see the tax being applied at the shipping port. But services trade? That faces behind the border obstacles. Because services are so deeply integrated into a society, the barriers end up being complex domestic regulations, licensing requirements, and rules demanding a local presence. These act as invisible, deep-seated roadblocks that are incredibly difficult to just negotiate away. A prime example of this is the Economic Needs Test, or ENT. This is a highly discretionary and honestly often very opaque test applied by a country to determine if a new foreign service supplier is actually needed in their local market. While it's designed to protect local social structures and businesses, it acts as a massive hidden barrier. It makes multilateral trade negotiations significantly harder than simply agreeing to lower a tariff on a shipment of cars. Which leaves us with a profound challenge for the future. How can the world continue to liberalize this massive invisible economy of services without eroding the domestic regulatory sovereignty of individual nations? It's a highly complex, delicate balancing act, and it's one that will absolutely define the next era of globalization and international trade. Thanks for joining me for this explainer. Keep asking questions and keep learning.